So my name is Paul, and I'm presenting on Israeli innovation. So the presentation is based on a book by Dan Senner and Paul Singer. The book is called Startup Nation. Although it's kind of at times an emotional appeal, I'm going to try to focus on less of the Zionist aspect and more on the intellectual level of what Israel has done to cultivate this culture of innovation. So the starting claim, the base of this book is that Israel is a pretty unique country. It has 7 million people. It's got no natural resources. It's constantly at war. And yet it has more startup companies than large, stable countries like Japan, China, India. And indeed, there's a lot of statistics that show you this, that Israel has the highest startup to population ratio of any country in the world. They have the most companies listed on the NASDAQ. They lead the world in VC investment. And they're particularly strong in technology. So these are companies you recognize. All these companies have R&D headquarters, research and development headquarters within Israel. And so the natural question here is why? Why does Israel have this startup ecosystem? And these are some of the reasons I came up with. I think Dan Senner and Paul Singer have similar reasons, but if we go through them, we can see that there's certainly an easy corporate R&D spinoff. Since all these companies have R&D headquarters in Israel, it would be easy just to split off and make your own thing. There's also this idea of support of government. Perhaps Israeli policy is more supportive of startups. Israel is somewhat unique in its military conflicts and in its mandatory service. There's a high standard of living within Israel. There's access to venture capital. Israel is a land of immigrants. It's a young country. Maybe there's something unique about the Jewishness of Israel that contributes to this innovative society. And lastly, there's a high level of education in Israel. So these things considered, Dan Senner and Paul Singer point to one factor in particular as the root. They start with this one. They say that the mandatory service in Israel, the IDF, is a unique factor that allows for this culture of innovation. So to start out, they point out the general benefits of military conscription. And the first is that there's a general high level of responsibility given to relatively young people. There's a sense of camaraderie. Maybe you get to international connections, and lastly, it's empowered. And there's even access to technology that you wouldn't have otherwise. Maybe military technology as well as cyber warfare. But clearly, this isn't enough because Israel isn't the only country with a mandatory military conscription. You have countries with similar, green bubbles I showed you earlier. They have the high level of education, access to venture capital, and yet they don't have, and they even have this military conscription. Those 2 examples are South Korea, Singapore, and yet they don't have the same level, the same culture of innovation. Granted, they're also very technologically in the right place, but Senner and Singer argued that the IDF is actually unique in the sense that the IDF, standing for the Israeli Defense Forces, is unique in that it promotes this innovation through its bottom-up structure. So the classic argument is that taxi drivers can command millionaires and 23-year-olds can train their uncles. And indeed, the IDF is understaffed at senior levels, and this puts a general emphasis on scrappiness on the level of foot soldiers. And lieutenants, lieutenants can get demoted by popular vote of their subordinates. This is something when you compare it to militaries like the U.S. military, is pretty contrasting. In the U.S. there's a saying that you don't salute the person, you salute the rank. So if you compare that, perhaps that's one of the root factors of the innovative culture. The second root factor that Senner and Singer cite is the immigration in Israel. So indeed, Israel is a startup nation. It's 60 years old. If you're living in Israel and you're not a first-generation immigrant, your parents probably were. There's this idea of right of return that any Jewish person, any person who associates with the Jewish religion is able to get instant naturalization and become a citizen of Israel. And while Israel is a home to a very diverse background and base of nationalities, the demographic was especially impacted by the Soviet Jewish exodus from 1970 to about 2000, where over 1 million Jews were kind of funneled into Israel through stuff like the Naples Plan. And Israel at the time was the only nation to really open its doors and offer this instant naturalization. The slogan being "Welcome home," whereas many other developed countries like the U.S. did not. Granted, these immigrants were highly educated, and in the USSR, while they only comprised 2% of the Soviet population, the estimates say they were about 30% of the nation's doctors. And so, while Senator and Singer recognize that this is true, and they make an argument against the idea that it's just because they were highly educated immigrants, because they point to the fact that Israel went out of its way to encourage immigration in the 1980s through something called Operation Moses, to airlift hundreds of impoverished Ethiopians into Israel and grant them instant citizenship. And the average age of those people was 14. There were live births on the plane. And granted, I'm not going to talk about the current implications, the political problems with that, which have been occurring. But if we only consider the outcome of innovation, then clearly Israel is going out of its way to promote this immigration. So, let me go. So this points to an idea that maybe there's something innate about being an immigrant that pushes someone towards innovation. Maybe it's a tolerance to risk. And this is a point I really agree with Senator and Singer on, that immigrants are innovators, and that while South Korea and Singapore are examples of countries with a lot of these factors that are important to maintaining an innovative culture, it's this high level of immigration, this immigration policy that allows Israel to stand out in its culture. Senator and Singer point to South Korea, and they say that there's this fear of losing face, this idea that you have something to lose, and that since why start a startup if you fail? And we're all familiar with that idea, and they really point to this as the root of the bane of innovation, this cultural complacency. So what can we take away from this? Perhaps we can use Israel as a case study, and we should take some lessons from it. One approach is to promote more bottom-up government involvement through programs like mandatory military conscription, but that's one thing. More importantly, I think more applicably, is opening immigration policy. So when policymakers talk about job creation and fostering a culture of innovation, perhaps one of the first things they should look at is immigration policy. And in the U.S., we've been blessed to have the melting pot culture, but perhaps it's time for us to open up a little bit more in order to cultivate this culture of innovation. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Is that everybody?
Yep, that's everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone.